record. Okay. Okay, so we are going to look at chapter 6, 7, and 8. So for chapter 6, I'm not going to do a lot of examples, but I'm going to explain the concept a little bit more in detail, and we're going to do some proofs that I think are necessary, which may also come in the exam. So okay, without wasting any time, so I'm just gonna like start. So anyway, and also we're gonna take breaks in between. So again, for those of you who have short attention span. So anyway, chapter 6, we will be looking at the minimum variance. Again, I mean like mean variance portfolio. So in this chapter, we are trying to make decisions. Like we are trying to find how, like, so this one is basically an introduction to your financial decision making. So so how will you make the decision of your finance is that you look at the returns. So the first thing that we are going to learn is the returns of our portfolio. So there are many ways of calculating returns. So we are going to be looking at these two ways, the total rate of return and the rate of return. So in most of the time, we are going to look at the rate of return. So I'm just going to put down the formulas down. So the total rate of return is normally denoted by capital R, and you can write it as, okay, before I can tell you this. So let's say maybe you have a timeline, right? So this is now at time 0, and then at time 1. So at time 0, this asset cost 0 rand, like it cost X 0, and then at time T1, it's gonna cost X1. So if you wanna learn how much return did you gain from that asset, then you are going to say X1 over X0. And then for the rate of return, this one over here, you use the smaller case letter. So it's going to be X1 minus X0. Okay, before I can continue, I think there are people who want to enter. I thought everyone is already inside. Yeah, okay, so this is two ways of calculating returns. So to find expected return, that is to assume that our X1 is again, is going to be a random variable. So if X1 is going to be a random variable, meaning that there are many states which it can be. So let's say maybe there is like state 1, state 2. So its price will depend on the state of the, again, I'm like, it will depend on the state of the economy. So in that case, you can say that X1 is a random variable. And to find the return, so again, we know that R bar is going to be equals to the expectation of R. And we know that only X1 is a random variable. So you're going to find your X1 bar over X0. And then for your expectation, again, I mean, like for your rate of return, you will also do the same, and then you're going to have X1 minus X0 over X0. So you're going to use X plus to show that it is return. So since we know that this thing is going to be expected, so it's going to be expected, it means that there is again, it means that we will have to like measure some kind of variation in this asset. So I'm not sure why I started with concept here. Okay. Okay. Before we can go that further, we need to learn a little bit about short selling. So short selling is when you use an asset that you don't own to make profit. So there are two ways where you can make profit in like by short selling an asset. So basically, short selling is when you borrow someone's asset and then you sell it immediately. And then at the end of time, at time one, you go and buy it back and then you return it. So one way you can make money from this is when that asset loses value. So it's when that asset loses value. So let's say maybe cost of x0 is greater than cost of x1. If this is the case, then you are going to short sell. So you are going to buy this asset for x. Okay, so let's say maybe it's gonna be dollar. So x$0, and then you're gonna have that dollar. So at the end of the time, you are going to say x$, right? Like x$0, and then you're gonna take out from there to buy x1, and then you will be left with a change, and this change is gonna be positive, right? So, and then you will return back x1, and then it simply means that you have made profit from short selling this asset. So this is when it loses value. And then another thing, again, and then another way you can make profit from short selling is when there is an arbitrage opportunity. So in this course, we are going to look at arbitrage. So when we are going to consider arbitrage, so we are going to consider it in this way. It's when we don't want to use our own money. Like in most cases, or actually in all the question papers I've seen, when they use arbitrage to gain, so when there is an arbitrage opportunity and they trying to take advantage of it, they almost never use their own money. So in this case, they are trying to use someone's asset to finance their own asset. So let's say maybe there is an arbitrage. We will learn more about arbitrage later. I'm gonna show you this first. So okay, let's say maybe you have two assets. You have asset one, asset one, and then you have asset two. So let's say maybe both these assets have the same price. They have the price of P1 and P1, right? And they have the same characteristics. You can say characteristics, or you can say they have the same risk profile, right? Risk profile. So let's just say maybe this risk profile is the same for both A and B. But the payouts are different. Let's say maybe payout is going to be Q, so it's going to be for Q1 and then for Q2. So let's say maybe the payouts are different, right? So this one's going to be payout or payoff. It's going to be price. So the prices are the same, and then the payouts are different. So how will you take advantage of this opportunity? So it will depend if, let's say maybe a Q1 is greater than Q2, right? If this is the case, you are going to short sell asset 2. You will short sell asset 2. Asset 2 to finance asset 1. So, and then what's gonna happen here? So you go to someone who have this asset which cost P. So this is asset 2, right? And then you sell it immediately. So you have an asset. I'm gonna show an asset like this. So I'm gonna say S2. So this S2, you are going to take it and then you sell it, and then you gain money of the price of P, right? And then you use this money to buy asset 2. Again, I mean like to buy asset 1, S1. And then S1 at the end of time will yield returns of Q, right? So this is at T1. So again, so at T1, it will yield Q, and then you're gonna sell it Okay, so you're gonna sell that thing for Q, and then you're gonna have Q dollars. And we know that Q dollars is greater. Okay, and I'm like Q1 dollars is greater than Q2. And then from here, you are going to use Q2, and then to buy back asset 2. I'm like, yeah, S2, and then you will have some money left, and then you will have some money left. I'm gonna call it change. And then you take back asset 2 to its owner. So it simply means that you have your profit over there. This, okay, so normally when they use short selling in this chapter, so in chapter 7, 8, or 9, so this is how you take advantage of your arbitrage opportunity. Of course, there can be multiple ways you can take advantage of it. It's when the prices are different, but then they have the same characteristics and risk profile, and the payoff are the same. So you can, so we can learn more about it later on, but then this is just an introduction to like short selling. I just want you to be aware of how you take advantage of short selling in this chapter. So you can, so in this case, we were looking at payoff. Most of the time, they will look at prices. So if the prices are different, you are going to short sell the one which is expensive to finance the cheaper one. So anyway, we can move on. You can ask questions, right? If you have any questions. I am allowing someone to join. So anyway, so how do you build a, again, I'm like a portfolio. So to build a portfolio, okay, let's say maybe you have, suppose that you have an asset, each with the return R1, 2, up to Rn, and the mean return. So this is the mean return. Rn. And variance sigma 1 squared, sigma 2 squared, sigma n squared, and each with weight of y1, 2, n. So to build a portfolio here is to combine all their assets. So there is no need for me to explain to build a, to find the returns of this portfolio. You are basically going to say R. So this one is just the return. This is going to be the sum of your weight of the asset and its return. So this is the and so this is how you find your asset.
Okay.
So yes. Sorry. Okay. So anyway, to find the expected return, which you denote by R bar, you're just gonna do the same thing, and then what you'll have at the end is gonna be the sum of weight. We already know that the weight is deterministic, so you can be calculating the weight. So the variance of return of your portfolio. So this is the portfolio, by the way, of your portfolio is going to be the expectation of R minus R bar squared, and what you will have at the end looks like something like this. So I won't show this one for time's sake, and because it's not that difficult to prove actually. So you can also write this variance like this. You can also write it like this. You can also write it like this. You can also write it as you can say it's going to be the sum of all your weight I squared sigma I squared squared this is for I plus the sum of your weight of J your weight of J gonna be J I not equals to J. So you're gonna have weight of J, weight of I sigma I J. So anyway, I have already included this thing over here. So we have already spoken about return as a random variable. So since this is how you can write your answer, I'm like your variance, right? We're gonna move to the diversification first. So when we move to the diversification, right? So in this chapter, I mean, like in this section, we are trying to see what will happen. So when you enlarge and you vary the product or your assets in an investment portfolio. So basically what happens when you enlarge this is when you include more assets or when you put more assets which are not correlated, where so this is varying asset. I just used same simple English. This one is enlarging. So basically diversification is the process of enlarging or varying product or assets in an investment portfolio. So to answer this question, right? So in our course, always when they talk about diversification, they will always mean that they are enlarging the number of assets in a portfolio. They are increasing them. So we can look at both scenarios, whether whether those assets are correlated or not. So in this case, this is what we will do. I'm gonna make space. So we have already said that this is your return. So your portfolio is gonna be the sum of I, weight of I squared sigma squared I plus the sum of J, the sum of I J, weight of I, weight of J, sigma IJ, right? So there is an assumption they will make first, is that the assumption is that you will let the weight of 1 be equals to the weight of 2 be equals to the weight of n. So it is simply mean that the weight will be 1 over n, right? So if this is the case, there are two scenarios. First, if the assets are also different, where I and j is equals to 0, where I and j is not equals to, where I is not equals to j. So in this case, your variance of a portfolio or the variance of the returns is gonna be like this. So you can write it like this. So you can say that the sum of 1 over n squared sigma squared I, because the weight it's squared over here. So the weight is squared plus 0. So because this thing, so this thing over here is going to be 0. So there is no need for you to write it down. So if this is the case, you are simply going to say, okay, you're going to sum all of them. So when you sum all of them, right? So what you will have is that, so okay, another assumption is that the variance of this asset, you're just gonna it's sigma. So if that's the case, then you will have n over 1 over n squared times sigma squared, and then you will be left with 1 over n sigma squared. So when you enlarge them, in statistics, you use this notation. So this is when you take n to infinity. You can see that the n is underneath. So this thing is going to go to 0. So when you enlarge it, it simply means that the risk will simply go to 0. Right? So as n increases, the risk also becomes 0. It goes towards 0. So we can look at another scenario where the returns, where the covariance is not equal to 0. In this case, then the variance of our portfolio, which is going to be the sum of still, it's going to be 1 over n squared sigma squared plus the sum of the j I not equals to j times the weight. So you can just write 1 over n squared. Then you can say sigma I j. So for convenience, right, you're gonna multiply this by n minus 1 over n minus 1, because you already know where this equation is going. So you wanna simplify it as much as you can. So this thing is the same as 1, right? So you're gonna multiply that thing by 1 over n over 1 over n. So it's the same as multiplying by 1. And then what happens here is that your variance, again, your risk, your portfolio risk is measured by variance, is gonna go this way. So anyway, so you will have 1 over n. So this thing on its own, again, you can like simplify this. It's no need for me to do all the steps now. So you can just say this. So this is how you can write it. And then you will have n minus 1 over n, right? The sum of your j, your I equals to j over 1 over n minus 1. So this is where I believe some of you are gonna get lost, right? So in order to explain this, I'm gonna have a little bit thing here. We know that our definition of expectation, to find the expectation of something, I'm gonna say x bar, is to find the sum, part. So you can just write it as the sum of all the weight. Let me say the weight times x, right? Xi, right? So again, this is assuming that they have the same weight, or you can just write weight. In this case, you can just say weight, or you can just say probability. Either way, it's fine. So I will assume that our weight is going to be 1 over n. So this is how you write your expectation, right? If this is the case, to find the expectation, to find the expectation of again, you can just say the so the expectation of the variance. So it's going to be the sum of 1 over n variance squared, right? So you can just denote this by x bar. So basically x star will be the expectation of your variance. So basically from here on, you can say your expectation of your variance, you can just write it as what? You can just write it as x star. I think I'm missing something, but okay. I will come back to it. So anyway, and then we're gonna start with j again. So the expectation here, sorry. this thing was better off when there was still the sums over here, because sorry, equals to 1 over n. So this will be your expectation. Okay. So the expectation again over this side. So you have the sum of j and this thing over here. So the n minus 1 can come a little bit outside, and then you will have the expectation of what. So you will have the expectation of your covariance. So this simply means that this expectation of j will be the sum. So I'm just gonna call them j. So it will be the sum of all the j's and the sigma ij over n. So this is gonna be your expectation first, and then you're gonna have another expectation over here, where is for I not equals to j. So this one is gonna be over 1 over n, because I is not gonna be here equals to j. So one of them, so one of the value is not gonna be there. So when you put the expectation of I of the expectation of j, then you can just write this thing as n 1 over, I'll use this pen over here to avoid confusing. You can just say n minus 1 over n d star. So you can just call this one the expectation of j of the expectation of I minus j. So this one is the expectation of the covariance. This whole thing here is the expectation. So this is how you explain them. So you basically found the double expectation of the two variants. So so this is your answer. So what happens? So I'm gonna write it down again. So what happened when this thing goes to infinity? When n goes to infinity, is that this thing will get to 0, yes, but then this one over here, it will not go to 0. In fact, it will go towards 1. So you're gonna have d. So this simply means that how you can graph this. So you can say this is d. So the variance, the risk, as n goes to infinity, goes towards d. So this is how you explain these two things. So anyway, I tried to upgrade Zubi yesterday. So it said he wanted me to pay a year, so I didn't have time to pay for the year. So after doing this, we all gonna log out, and then we can come back again. So if you have any questions, oh, I see 5 questions. Sorry. Oh, okay. There are no questions. Okay, so far, okay, and then we're gonna look at feasible set. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on feasible sets again. So in terms of feasible sets, this is what you can do. So this is what you can do. So it will depend on how many assets you have. So we will first look at 2 assets. You have A and B. So the shape of the feasible set will depend on the correlation coefficient of these 2 assets. If the correlation coefficient of A and B is going to be equals to 1, so this is how your feasible set is going to be. And then if your correlation coefficient of A and B is going to be equals to 1, this is how your feasible set is going to be. And then if your correlation coefficient is going to be somewhere in between, so this is how it will be. So it's going to be in between 1 and -1. So normally when you think about feasible sets, in reality, it's quite rare to find that assets are perfectly correlated or they have a perfect negative correlation. So we normally, so when they ask you to draw a feasible set, normally you can just write it like this because it's generic one. So it's the generic one. So because we expect it to be in between 1 and -1, although we don't know to what, although we don't know to which degree, but we know that it's going to be in between -1 and 1, unless if they state otherwise. So if they ask you to draw a feasible set, so this is how you are going to draw it. So in terms of feasible sets, in terms of the efficient frontier, this is how, so let's say maybe we have our generic feasible set. Our efficient frontier is this over here, because for every risk, this one, so if we have risk, let's say maybe this one is risk star. So you can see that there are 2 portfolios, but then this one over here is always the best one to choose. So we call this one our feasible set. And people who are risk averse, they will always like very, very risk averse. So they will have to choose this one over here. I have to use a black pen. There. So this one is sometimes called the minimum variance. Although sometimes, depending on which book you use, this word minimum variance and efficient frontier interchangeably. Sometimes I've also seen it in the question papers where they say find necessarily because it's on the minimum variance, but then it's because it's on the efficient frontier. So this is first part of our lesson, and then we're gonna go to our second part of our lesson. So do you have any questions at the moment? You can type it down or you can unmute your mic. Okay, someone's really good. Okay, I would ask you guys to, okay, we still have 1 minute left. Okay, I'm gonna ask you guys to log out so that I can send you a new link. It's gonna take us more than 1 hour because this one, it's timed at 40 minutes, if that's fine with everyone.
Okay, so do we just log out now, then you'll send a new link on the group?
Yes.
Okay, cool.